long before pyramids rose in Egypt, before Rome drew its first map. Vast civilizations flourished across North America. Their cities aligned with the stars, their mounds touched the heavens, and their stories vanished into the soil. Tonight, as the world drifts to sleep, we'll uncover what was lost, the forgotten builders, the silent astronomers, and the mysteries buried beneath our own feet. Before the cities and the noise, before the borders and the names, there was only the land. A continent stretching endlessly, quiet and alive, North America in its earliest breath. The air was different then, heavy with the scent of untouched earth and wild rain. Forests rolled like green oceans, reaching from one horizon to the next. Rivers carved their silver paths through the land, unhurried and ancient, their waters whispering to the stones beneath. The wind carried no human language yet, only the soft chorus of life, the call of birds, the low hum of insects, the distant thunder that seemed to speak directly to the soil. Somewhere, beneath the shadows of towering trees, a fire flickered, a small one, a fragile bloom of light against the immensity of wilderness. Around it sat the earliest humans to walk this land. Their footprints, long since erased by time, were among the first to mark the continent's story. They had crossed icy bridges of land thousands of years before, following herds and the promise of warmth, never knowing they were stepping into a new world that would one day be called America. The night wrapped them in silence. The stars hung impossibly bright, closer perhaps than they are now. The people watched them as if listening. They didn't name them yet, but they knew their rhythms, their paths. The stars told them when the cold would come, when the rivers would swell, when the earth would bloom again. They didn't have calendars or scripts. Their time was written in wind and light. Imagine standing there in that first dawn. The mist rising from the valleys, the forest alive with breath. Mammoths wandered across the plains then, enormous and gentle, brushing against the morning fog. Saber-toothed cats moved like shadows at the edge of sight. The land was not tamed, not yet divided. It existed in pure balance, a world that breathed with everything upon it. The people learned the rhythms of this world slowly. They watched how the deer moved when winter neared, how the geese vanished and returned again, always faithful to the unseen map of the sky. They learned to listen to the land's quiet instructions, when to move, when to wait, when to plant, and when to pray. And somewhere in that long silence of years, they began to change the land, just as the land changed them. By the flowing Mississippi, long before pyramids rose in Egypt, there were small villages of woven grass and clay. The people shaped the soil into gentle mounds, not yet the grand monuments that would come later, but symbols, gestures toward something sacred. They didn't build to rule, they built to remember. The mounds were not just earth but memory, shaped by countless hands and dreams. The land, too, remembered them. Even now, beneath layers of time, their traces linger. A fragment of pottery here, a stone blade there, a pattern etched faintly into the ground. These were the first architects of this hemisphere, though they didn't call themselves that. Their homes were made of what the forest gave: bark, grass, river reed. They lived lightly, leaving only whispers behind. When night fell, they sat around fires, listening to stories that were not yet written, but carried in voice and breath. The stories told of spirits in the rivers, of the great animals that once spoke, of mountains that could dream. They were not myths yet. They were the truth of the time, the shape of understanding. And as the millennia passed, these small camps grew into settlements. The forest heard laughter, the sound of tools, the hum of songs rising with the wind. The people learned to shape stone, to carve wood, to weave fibers into baskets strong enough to hold both food and hope. They mapped the world not with ink, but with memory. A river remembered by the curve of a mountain, a path remembered by the sound of birds. The land itself became a teacher. In the far north, the tundra people learned patience from the snow. In the warm southern valleys, others learned abundance from the earth's generosity. The continent was vast enough to shape many kinds of people, each molded by the rhythms of their place. They were astronomers without telescopes, farmers without borders, builders without blueprints. Yet their understanding of balance, between life, death, earth, and sky, was deeper than we can easily measure. To them everything lived. The river was a being, the stone a spirit, the mountain a guardian. To walk upon the land was to walk within a living story. Thousands of years passed this way, quietly, slowly, like a song sung under one's breath. The climate shifted, the ice withdrew, the great beasts faded into myth, but the people remained. They adapted, learned, and remembered. Every generation carried the memory of the one before, not in books but in breath. And somewhere along those quiet centuries the land began to change again, this time under human hands. Villages grew larger. Paths became trade routes. The first seeds of maize were planted. The first fields tended with patience and care. Humanity had begun to settle, to stay, to root themselves into the earth that had once only carried their passing steps. The rivers, the lifeblood of this ancient world, became the centers of life. Along the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Tennessee, cultures rose that would later shape an entire continent's forgotten history. But for now they lived in harmony, their lives unfolding in rhythm with the world, unhurried and unseen. The night deepens, and the fire crackles softly. You can almost hear it, the slow pulse of an ancient drum echoing across the plains, the whisper of the wind through the cedar trees, the distant song of water meeting stone. This is where history truly began, though no one called it that. This was the beginning, not of kings or empires, but of belonging. The people did not yet think of themselves as ancient, as ancestors. They were simply living, planting, hunting, dreaming beneath skies so vast that even time seemed to bend around them. Yet everything they touched, every mound they raised, every path they walked, became the foundation of a world still pulsing beneath our feet. Tonight, as you listen and drift into the quiet, imagine the glow of that first fire reflected in the eyes of those who came before us. Imagine the silence of the untouched world and the heartbeat of the earth beneath it. That is where our story begins. The fire still burns in the dark, a single thread of light between the ancient past and everything that would follow. The night is endless, and in its quiet you can almost sense time folding, centuries sliding softly over one another. The land begins to change slowly, almost invisibly. What were once small wandering bands become communities that stay. Their footprints deepen. Their presence begins to leave marks that last beyond a single lifetime. By the rivers, the people have learned something extraordinary: how to listen to the seasons and coax life from the soil. The seeds they plant answer their patience, and the wild becomes a garden. Maize rises in golden rows beneath the sun, squash and beans intertwining in quiet companionship. For the first time, humans begin to shape the world not just to survive, but to build a future within it. The mists of time are thick here. Archaeologists will one day give names to these cultures, but in this age there are only lives, songs, and the steady rhythm of work. The river valleys become sanctuaries of abundance. Fish flash in the shallows, berries ripen in the woods, and children laugh along the banks where their ancestors once walked in silence. It is in these fertile valleys that the first architects of the Americas begin to dream in earth and sky. Long before the pyramids of Mexico or the stone cities of the Andes, the mound builders of the Mississippi world shape their visions from soil and spirit. Their hands move in unison, guided by a knowledge passed through countless generations, not written but remembered. They raise mounds that rise like quiet hills, layered with meaning. Some align with the sun's solstice path. Others mirror constellations above. The land becomes a calendar, a temple, a memory. Each mound is a prayer you can walk upon. They build not for glory but for continuity, for the understanding that life flows in circles, not lines. By night, the fires of their villages shimmer across the riverbanks, reflected in the still water like stars fallen to earth. Drums echo faintly in the distance, their rhythm steady, heartbeat-like. Each sound, each vibration connects the living to the unseen. The people believe that the dead are never gone, that their voices ride the wind, their footsteps echo in rain. The mounds are places where worlds meet, the breathing and the beyond. They trade across vast distances. Obsidian from the far west glints in the hands of those by the Mississippi. Seashells from the Gulf Coast adorn the necks of people thousands of miles away. Copper gleams from the northern lakes. It is a network so wide, so intricate that even now its full reach is hard to imagine. Long before ships crossed oceans, the people of North America crossed rivers, plains, and mountains to share stories, goods, and dreams. In the mornings, mist rolls off the river like a living thing. You can almost see them. Figures emerging from the fog, carrying baskets of clay or woven reed, walking along paths that will one day disappear beneath cities. They move with quiet purpose, guided by instinct and tradition older than memory. They knew balance. The land was not conquered but courted, its gifts received with reverence. They burned the prairies in cycles to renew them, fished with care, took what they needed and no more. Their homes were built low and round in harmony with the shape of the earth itself. Each village a constellation reflected on the ground. As centuries pass, their works grow more ambitious. Great earthen pyramids rise where the rivers meet, not tombs but centers of ceremony and connection. At Cahokia, the largest of these cities, tens of thousands gather. It is the beating heart of a continent, long before history will call it so. Fields stretch to the horizon and wooden posts mark the path of the sun. The people here have mapped not just the earth, but the heavens. Imagine standing atop one of those mounds at twilight. The air thick with the scent of grass and smoke. The sound of distant chanting rising like wind through trees. Below, the city glows softly with firelight, and above, the first stars appear. Every flame below mirrors a star above. The boundary between earth and sky blurs, and for a moment they are the same. The people knew stories about where they came from. Some spoke of emerging from the earth itself, born from caves and rivers, carried into light by spirits of stone and water. Others said they descended from the stars, guided by constellations that still bear their names. These weren't myths in the way we think of them now. They were maps of belonging, ways to explain that they and the land were not separate but parts of the same breathing whole. And then, time moves again. The great mounds fall quiet. The fires dim. Centuries pass, storms come, rivers shift their paths. Forests reclaim what was once human. The city sinks softly back into the earth. The wind forgets the language of drums. Yet beneath the soil, everything remains. The traces of lives and dreams and hands that shaped the continent before anyone wrote a single word of its history. When archaeologists rediscover these places thousands of years later, they are stunned by their age, their complexity, their mystery. How could a civilization like this have existed here, so long before the first Europeans arrived? The answer lies in the silence itself. The people had always been here. They never needed to be discovered. Their stories simply flowed too deep for history's surface to reflect. And now, as the night deepens and you drift further into calm, imagine the heartbeat of that ancient world, the rivers, the drums, the quiet pulse of life that still hums beneath modern soil. The land remembers always. Every forest, every mountain, every slow-turning river carries echoes of the civilizations that came before, older than we ever thought. Sleep, and let the past breathe through the silence. Somewhere beneath your dreams the old fires still burn. Time moves softly like mist curling through a forest. The world is changing again, though no one can see it happening. Seasons blur, rivers shift their courses, and centuries pass like single sighs. The people of the great valleys still live by the rhythm of the land. But something subtle begins to stir. A slow transformation written into the soil, into the air, into the memories passed from one generation to the next. The great mounds still stand, though grass now grows over their summits. The drums still echo, but fainter, carried farther by the wind. Children play where ceremonies once filled the night with song, unaware that they tread upon sacred ground. The world has begun to forget, not out of neglect, but because the earth itself has begun to turn the page. There are fewer mammoths now, fewer bison thundering across the plains. Forests shift northward, the climate warming, reshaping the very balance of life. Crops must be adapted, rivers must be followed anew, yet even in change there is continuity. The people endure, bending like reeds but never breaking. Their stories evolve, their songs take on new meanings. But the thread remains, an unbroken connection between human and land, spirit and season. Somewhere deep in the southern forests, a woman kneels beside a river, pressing her hand into the mud. She lifts it, seeing her reflection ripple with the water's flow. She does not know that thousands of years later, someone will stand in this same place and wonder who once walked here, who once listened to the same soft rush of water against stone. History is not lost, and it only sleeps. The great centers like Cahokia begin to fade. The reasons, like so much else, are written in the silence of time. Perhaps the floods came too often. Perhaps the forests around them grew thin, the soil weary from generations of planting. Perhaps people simply moved on, searching for balance elsewhere, following the whispers of the old world calling them home. But their spirit never vanished. It traveled with them, in their baskets, in their songs, in the memories they carried like fire across the continent. Villages smaller now, but no less meaningful. Fires burning still, warming new generations who gaze up at the same patient stars. The land remembers every step. When the wind moves through the prairies, it hums softly through the tall grass, like breath over forgotten graves. When rain falls on a mound now covered in forest, it carries the same rhythm as it did 1,000 years ago. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the night utterly still, you can almost imagine hearing it. A faint echo of drums, a whisper of voices rising in language lost to time. They are not gone. They are simply part of the land again, speaking in ways the living must learn to hear anew. Far to the west, other people rise. The ancestral Puebloans, high in the desert cliffs, carve their homes into the rock itself, sanctuaries suspended between earth and sky. Their walls hold the color of sunrise, their kivas open to the heavens. They too follow the stars, their buildings aligned with solstice and shadow. Across the continent, without ever meeting, civilizations are dreaming the same dream, to bring the cosmos down to earth. At night, fires flicker in the desert, just as they did by the rivers. The same constellations turn above. Orion, the Pleiades, the endless path of the Milky Way stretching like smoke across the dark. To them, the stars are ancestors, watchers, and guides. The same way the rivers speak to those in the forests, the stars speak to those in the cliffs. Each group listens to the world in their own language, but all are hearing the same truth, that life, no matter where it blooms, is part of something eternal. Centuries pass again. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fade. The mounds become hills. The cliff cities crumble to dust, and the forests reclaim what once belonged to the living. But their memory never dies. It becomes the heartbeat of the land itself. When explorers and settlers finally arrive, they see the mounds and cannot imagine who built them. They call them mysteries, remnants of a vanished race, unaware that the descendants of those builders still walk the same rivers, still speak the same prayers in different tongues. The myth of the lost civilization is born, but the truth is simpler and deeper. The people never vanished. They changed, adapted, lived on, carrying fragments of their past within their hands and hearts. In a quiet clearing, centuries later, an elder sits by a fire and tells a story to a child. It is a story about the stars and the rivers, about a time when the world was new. She does not call it history, but that's what it is. History without dates, memory without walls. The story drifts into the smoke, carried upward to the same night sky her ancestors once watched. That's how the ancient landscape still breathes. Not through ruins or relics, but through memory and voice. Through the way the land still feeds, still shelters, still listens. And now as you rest and the world outside fades, imagine that silence. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast plain under a sky so full of stars that it seems to hum. The wind is cool, the grass moves in slow waves, and beneath your feet, layers of history lie sleeping. Thousands of years of footsteps, songs, dreams, all blending into the heartbeat of the earth. North America was never an empty world waiting to be found. It was ancient, alive, filled with light long before history began to write its name. The people who walked it first left no marble, no stone, no grand monuments, only earth, spirit, and story. And that perhaps is the truest kind of immortality. Now the night deepens. The air grows still. The echoes of the past become softer, distant, like a lullaby carried by the wind. Somewhere beneath the soil and stars the first fires still burn, quiet, eternal. Sleep now. The land is still dreaming, and you are part of that dream. The story begins in silence. A morning mist drifts over the valley, soft and slow, wrapping the world in its veil. The river moves like a dream through the green heart of the land, and on its banks shadows stir. People waking to another day in a place that has already forgotten time. They rise before the sun, though they know exactly where it will appear, because they have built their world to meet it. Long before clocks, before calendars and compasses, these people, the builders of the mounds, learned to listen to the sky. They watched the sun climb and fall across the seasons, measured the tilt of shadows and read in the stars the rhythm of their world. To them the heavens were not distant. They were mirrors of the earth. Every sunrise, every solstice, every slow turn of the moon was a voice speaking to them, and they answered with soil and vision. If you were to stand among them thousands of years ago, you would see something magnificent taking shape, earth rising into order, geometry forming from patience and hands, great mounds emerging from the ground like breathing hills, perfect in proportion, deliberate in direction. At first they seem like simple hills, but they are more than that. They are maps, maps of belief, maps of the sky, maps of connection between world seen and unseen. Across what we now call North America, these monumental shapes appear. Some shaped like cones, some like long ridges, some serpent-like and coiling across the hills. They stretch from the Mississippi to the Ohio Valley, from Louisiana's bayous to the plains beyond. Each one built grain by grain, basket by basket, lifted by hands that never saw themselves as separate from the earth they molded. Imagine the city of Cahokia, vast and alive. Around the year 1100, it rises near the banks of the Mississippi, glowing under the summer sun. Tens of thousands live there in homes of reed and wood, their lives woven around great plazas and earthen pyramids. At the city's heart stands Monk's Mound, a towering structure of layered earth 4 terraces high, taller than anything else built in the Americas north of Mexico. It took centuries of labor, millions of basketfuls of soil, each laid carefully to resist erosion, to last beyond generations. And still it stands, But Cahokia is not only a city of earth, it is a city of stars. To its east lies a ring of tall wooden posts, what archaeologists would later call Woodhenge. To the people of Cahokia it was a circle of sky watchers, a calendar of the cosmos. The posts were set with precision to mark the solstices and equinoxes. When the sun rose between specific posts, the people knew the seasons had turned. Planting, harvest, ceremony, all aligned with the path of light through the year. At dawn, the chief and the astronomers would climb the mound summit, the horizon glowing gold. When the sun touched the perfect gap between posts, a collective hush would fall over the crowd below. They were witnessing the universe speaking, the earth and sky meeting for a brief sacred moment. This was not science and faith separated, but one continuous truth. To them the heavens were alive, and their mounds were bridges reaching toward it. And far to the south, in the winding wetlands of Louisiana, another wonder rests, Poverty Point. Older even than Cahokia, it rises from the earth like a great earthen fingerprint. From the air you can still see it. Concentric ridges forming vast half-circles around a central plaza, with large mounds at their edges, some shaped like birds spreading their wings. It was built more than 3,000 years ago, when Egypt's pharaohs still ruled the Nile, when the great stones of Stonehenge were already weathered by rain. Yet here, in a world untouched by bronze or iron, an equally sophisticated monument grew from clay and dream. The people who built Poverty Point understood the rhythm of the stars just as deeply. Their mounds align with the solstices and lunar cycles. Night after night they would watch the constellations move across the dark. Orion rising, the Pleiades glittering like embers, the Milky Way arcing like smoke. The heavens were their storybook, their calendar, their guide. To build upon the earth in harmony with that sky was to weave themselves into the fabric of existence. Each mound was a statement. We are here. We belong. We understand. And then, somewhere in the rolling green of southern Ohio, lies a serpent. Vast, silent, eternal. The serpent mound, curling and coiling along the ridge for more than 100 to 300 feet, its head aligned to the setting sun of the summer solstice. No stones mark its boundaries, only earth, flowing like a living creature frozen in motion. When you stand beside it, you feel as though it is breathing, its curves echoing the hills around it. The builders of the serpent mound shaped it not for shelter, but for story. To them the serpent was creation and rebirth, the force that slithered between worlds, uniting above and below. Its head faces where the sun dies each summer, its coils aligned with lunar patterns. The serpent's mouth appears to swallow an egg-shaped mound. The sun itself, being devoured or born again, depending on how you see it. No matter where you look, the pattern repeats, and sky and soil intertwined, belief mapped in geometry. The mounds are not just monuments. They are language made of land. Each one speaks in alignments, in silence, in shadow. As night falls over the ancient valleys, the fires light once more. From the top of a mound you can see the flicker of other fires far away, small dots of civilization in the endless dark. Drums echo across the plains, a heartbeat passed from one community to the next. People lift their eyes to the same sky we see now, unchanged and eternal. The stars whisper the same secrets, and they answer in earth and fire. The builders of these mounds may not have left written words, but they wrote with light and soil. Every line of a ridge, every orientation of a circle, every deliberate rise of earth tells us they knew, deeply, beautifully, that to live was to exist within the great rhythm of all things. Their world was sacred, but not separate from the ordinary. The field where corn grew was the same earth that held the ancestors. The mound that marked the sun's path was also a home for ceremony, for gathering, for dream. To them, life and the cosmos were one story, endless, circular, unfolding in the pulse of the earth. And when the fires finally dim, when the stars shimmer above the misty river, there is peace. The people rest, the land breathes, and the heavens continue their dance. The mounds stand quietly in the dark, watching. The night stretches endless, velvet and deep, and above it all, the stars burn steady, not as distant fires but as living eyes watching over the world. To the mound builders, these were not just points of light. They were beings, ancestors, and guides. Each one had meaning. Each path in the sky was a story. The heavens were not a mystery to be solved. They were a conversation to be joined. Imagine the great plaza of Cahokia under this ancient sky. The air is cool, scented with river water and wood smoke. The fires burn low as hundreds gather in silence. In the distance, the dark silhouette of Monk's Mound rises like a mountain made by human hands. Its flanks are smooth, its summit broad, crowned by a wooden temple. And beyond it, the wooden circle, Woodhenge, standing in perfect formation. They wait. The horizon blushes faintly, the first light of dawn. Slowly the sun edges upward, golden and immense. It touches the gap between two posts, the exact point that marks the summer solstice. The crowd breathes as one. Children lift their faces toward the light. Elders whisper blessings to the earth. It is not spectacle but renewal, a promise kept. Each year this dance between earth and sun repeats, precise, flawless, eternal. The people know when to plant, when to harvest, when to gather and give thanks. But deeper than that, they feel the unity of it, how their hands in the soil, their prayers in the air, their mounds rising toward the sky, all belong to the same pattern. The circle turns and they are part of its turning. From above, if you could look down through centuries, you would see how the city itself mirrors the heavens. The Grand Plaza aligns with the four directions. Pathways stretch like sunbeams from its center. Mounds mark not random ground but celestial markers, points that trace the path of the sun and moon across the horizon. Cahokia was not just a city. It was a sky made of earth. Far to the south, at Poverty Point, the same wisdom lives in different form. The great ridges curve in concentric arcs, 6 half rings embracing a wide plaza. At dawn, when mist lies low over the bayou, the light pours between those ridges like water, filling the hollow spaces with warmth. The effect is deliberate. The builders shaped the land to hold light. When night falls, the scene reverses. The stars appear to follow those same lines, gliding along the ridge's arcs as if the heavens were moving in sync with the earth. To stand there in silence is to feel the architecture of the cosmos itself, each ridge a verse, each mound a breath. The people of Poverty Point were travelers too, traders who brought stones, shells, and minerals from faraway lands. But what they truly traded were ideas, how to shape the world in harmony with what was above it. The site's design mirrors not only the sun and moon, but possibly the path of the Milky Way itself, the great celestial river arching across the sky. The Mississippi below and the Milky Way above, and twin waters flowing in eternal reflection. And then there is the serpent. In the forests of southern Ohio, the Serpent Mound lies in silence, its curves long and graceful, as if the earth itself had turned to motion. From above it coils like thought, like wind, like time. The head faces the horizon where the summer sun dies each year. When that day comes, light slides across the serpent's body, golden and soft, until the very tip of its tongue glows with fire. The people who shaped it, the ancient Adena, perhaps, or those who came after, did not build randomly. They placed every curve with intention. Each bend of the serpent aligns with a lunar phase or a solstice sunset. The entire figure may be a map of the moon's complex path, something few modern eyes could trace without instruments, yet they knew. They knew by watching, by remembering, by living with the rhythm of light and shadow. To them, the serpent was not a symbol of evil or danger. It was power, change, and eternity. The serpent sheds its skin, renewing itself, reminding the living that death is only another beginning. And so they shaped that truth into the land, a creature of the sky reborn in earth. When people gathered there for ceremony, they did not worship idols. They honored balance, sun and moon, life and death, light and shadow. Imagine standing there at dusk. The forest hums with summer insects. The air is heavy with the scent of rain. The mound beneath your feet is cool, soft, alive. As the sun sinks, the serpent's shadow stretches, swallowing the field in twilight. The people gather in silence, torches flickering like stars. A chant begins, low, rhythmic, ancient. Each note a heartbeat of earth. It is not just a ritual. It is memory in motion, a way to keep time's circle unbroken. The builders of these sacred places were astronomers, engineers, artists, and dreamers, but they never divided those things. To watch the stars was to pray. To shape the earth was to tell a story. To live was to remember that all things, light, soil, blood, breath, belong to the same endless pattern. And so the mounds were more than monuments. They were living temples, their geometry breathing, their purpose evolving with each sunrise. They taught the people how to live in balance, how to measure not just the passing of seasons but the pulse of existence itself. As the night deepens, the stars return to their endless path. Above Cahokia they turn in quiet spirals. Above Poverty Point they scatter like dusted embers. Above the serpent mound they shimmer in the serpent's silent gaze. And below, the land listens, the rivers whisper, the grass sways. The ancient architecture of belief hums softly in the dark. All of it. The soil, the stars, the people, one great body breathing. Time moves like a slow river. You can barely feel it, but one day you realize the banks have changed. The current has shifted and the world is no longer what it was. So it was for the mound builders, their cities, their alignments, their sacred rhythms. Each pulsed for centuries like the steady beat of a heart, until one day, the heartbeat faded into stillness. No single moment ended it. No sudden storm, no invader, no flame. The change came quietly, like dusk creeping through a forest. Crops began to fail. Rivers changed course. Trade routes that once carried shells and copper now carried silence. The gatherings grew smaller. The songs that once marked the solstice drifted into memory, and yet, for a time they still came, families, elders, wanderers up the slopes of the great mounds, offering food, smoke, and prayer to the horizon. They still watched the stars. They still whispered to the earth. But slowly the wood temples decayed, their roofs fallen to time, the posts of Woodhenge rotted, leaving only the sky they once measured. And the grass grew tall over places where thousands once walked, but the land remembered. Centuries passed. Trees rooted where plazas once lay. The rivers carved new paths, washing over fragments of pottery, bones, and stone. The people who came after, those who would later be called the Mississippian descendants, the tribes who lived in the forests and along the great waters, carried echoes of the old world in their stories. They spoke of the great serpent that guarded the underworld, of the sky people who moved in shining paths across the night, of the sacred balance between above and below. They remembered without knowing that what they spoke of were the same truths their ancestors had written in earth and starlight. And one day, the new people arrived from across the ocean. They saw only hills. To them, the mounds were curiosities, burial grounds, heaps of dirt. They dug into them for treasure, for bones, for answers that could fit inside their own books of history. They found wonders, but they did not understand the language of those shapes. They did not see how every curve, every elevation, was a sentence written in geometry and devotion. But time has a way of circling back. In our own era, when the hum of cities fills the night and the stars are dimmed by artificial light, a few still listen. Archaeologists, dreamers, travelers, those who look at the ground and feel the echo of something vast beneath it. They study the alignments, trace the post holes, measure the mounds with satellite precision, and each discovery reveals what the old ones already knew, that the universe is not far away. It is here, in the rhythm of sunrise and shadow, in the steady breath of the soil. At Cahokia, they find evidence of urban complexity that rivals the ancient world: grand plazas, neighborhoods, ceremonial centers. They uncover remnants of colored plaster, beads, tools, carvings, pieces of lives built around beauty and precision. At Poverty Point, they uncover networks so vast they stretch across half a continent, proof that trade and culture pulsed like a great artery through the heart of North America. And at the Serpent Mound, they bring instruments to study what no instrument can truly capture: the quiet power of intention, the grace of design shaped not by conquest but by communion. They realize the serpent's alignment with the lunar standstill, an event that occurs once every 18.5 years, a cycle so subtle that only generations of observation could have marked it. It means those people, long before writing, long before metal or wheel, tracked the movement of the heavens with such devotion that they shaped the land itself to reflect eternity. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, imagine standing again on that ridge. The stars hang clear above you, the air carries a scent of rain and pine. In the distance, a river moves, slow and gleaming under moonlight. You can almost hear the faint rhythm of drums, the murmur of prayers carried on wind. The mounds rise around you like breathing earth, each curve filled with memory. The moon climbs higher. Its light brushes the serpent's body, sliding along its length, shimmering on the grass. Somewhere an owl calls, soft and low. Everything feels alive, not separate: the land, the stars, the wind, and you, but woven together, each heartbeat syncing with the slow turning of the planet. And you begin to understand what the mound builders must have felt. Not awe for the sky as something distant, but gratitude that it was here within reach, mirrored in the world they shaped. The same constellations that guided them burn still, unchanged by centuries, whispering through the thin veil of time. The stars you see now are the same that rose over Cahokia's wooden temple, the same that gleamed in the eyes of those who stood at Poverty Point at dawn, the same that cast silver light across the Serpent Mound's silent coils. They looked up, and so do you. They breathed, and so do you. The circle is unbroken. The world that came before is not gone. It moves beneath you, around you, within you. The knowledge of the earth and the sky still hums in the dark, still threads through the roots, still waits in the quiet places for those who listen. So close your eyes. Feel the ancient rhythm, slow, steady, endless. You are standing on sacred ground, shaped by hands that knew the stars. You are part of the same pattern, the same great story, older than history, older than words. And as the night folds over the land, you drift with it, into the same silence the builders once knew, the silence between breaths, between stars, between worlds, where time disappears, and only the steady pulse of the universe remains. Sleep now. The earth remembers for you. Before cities had walls, before borders had names, the world was stitched together by paths made of footsteps. Across the forests and rivers of ancient North America, those paths spread like quiet veins, carrying not armies but stories, songs, and the shimmer of faraway stone. Imagine the dawn thousands of years ago, mist rising from a river that will one day be called the Mississippi. A canoe glides through the still water, its surface breaking like glass around the prow. In the boat are two people, faces calm, movement steady. Between them rests a bundle wrapped in woven grass. Inside, black obsidian that once came from volcanoes in the lands of the south. Mexico, perhaps farther still. The stone catches the first light and holds it like frozen fire. For the people of this continent, distance was never emptiness. It was a living web. Trails wound through forests dense with oak and pine, across prairies shimmering with morning dew, along mountain ridges where the wind carried the scent of rain. Some paths followed rivers, the great moving roads of the world. Others were carved by memory alone, a chain of landmarks whispered from one traveler to another. As they moved, they carried more than goods. They carried connection. Obsidian from far volcanoes, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf. Each object a fragment of another world. When they changed hands, something invisible passed with them. Trust, recognition, belonging. The traders traveled in silence often, guided by the stars at night and the curve of rivers by day. They knew how to read the flight of birds, how to follow moss on the north sides of trees, how to find the next fire long before they could see its smoke. Each journey could last weeks or months. They would pass through villages built beside mounds or lakes where people spoke in many dialects, yet shared the same rhythm of breath when offering food or water. At night, as fires burned low, they would lay the obsidian beside them, the copper tools, the woven cloth, tokens of the world's vastness. The air shimmered with stories of where each came from. Mountains that breathed smoke, waters that sang, forests where the sun never fully set. These were not myths, but memories carried across generations, written in trade and trust. The obsidian traveled north, jagged, glass-like, and sharp enough to cut light itself. From it, artisans shaped blades and ornaments that gleamed like night water. When one held such a piece, they held the breath of the earth's deepest fire, a fragment of mountain thunder cooled into stone. To receive it was to hold power, but not the kind of power that conquers. It was the power of connection, proof that the world extended beyond the horizon. And then there was copper. From the great waters of the north, when what we call the Great Lakes, people dug it from the earth in bright veins. They shaped it into tools and pendants, hammering softly with stone, polishing until it caught the sun like flame. Copper moved south along those same rivers and paths, traded for obsidian, for shells, for colored stone and woven cloth. By the time it reached the Gulf, it gleamed with the fingerprints of 100 hands, each one leaving a little of their world behind. Shells traveled in the opposite direction, from warm coastal waters where tides whispered against white sand. They were carried inland for hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. When the traders reached the river towns, they would open their bundles to reveal spirals of pink and ivory, shaped by the sea and polished by time. To inland peoples who had never seen the ocean, such shells were treasures beyond measure, symbols of distant waters, of dreams that touched the edge of the world. Each trade was more than exchange. It was ceremony, a gift offered, a gift received, sealed with words or silence or song. Villages along these routes became gathering places, sanctuaries of conversation and rest. Fires burned through the night. Stories rose with the smoke, and somewhere between the laughter and the listening, new paths were born. The network grew wider than the eye could see. Obsidian flowing north, copper moving south, shells glimmering west, knowledge traveling with them all. It was not a web of conquest, but communion, a slow and patient rhythm that held the continent together. As you listen now, you can almost feel that rhythm beneath your own heartbeat. The steady pulse of footsteps over soil, paddles dipping into rivers, wind moving through open grasslands. The world breathing as one. Would you like me to continue to part 2? The next 1,000 words? Where the story follows these networks through the great river valleys, describing how trade carried not just goods but languages, myths and ceremonies binding distant peoples together across millennia. You said yes. ChatGPT said part 2. Rivers of memory. The rivers carried everything. They flowed through the bones of the continent like great silver threads, endless and alive. Every ripple, every bend was known to someone. The Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, the Arkansas. Their names would come later, but long before language hardened into maps, the people knew their song. To travel them was to move through time itself, from forest to plain to ocean, never leaving the body of the earth. The traders followed these currents as though they were veins of the sky reflected below. They would set out at dawn, when mist hung low and the surface of the water shimmered like liquid glass. Canoes carved from single trees slid silently forward, each stroke of the paddle sending ripples into a horizon that seemed infinite. Sometimes they traveled in groups, sometimes alone, following memory, instinct, and the pull of stars that would guide them home. Along these waters, villages bloomed like constellations. At the mouth of each tributary there would be smoke rising, homes made of clay and cane, songs drifting across the air. Children playing beside the river, laughter echoing, and always, the same gesture of welcome. Open palms, the offering of food, the warmth of fire. The trader would come ashore and share news from the lands beyond the horizon, the color of foreign mountains, the scent of unknown forests, the strange and beautiful shells that gleamed with the colors of dawn. But what they carried was more than objects. They carried knowledge. The obsidian might pass from one hand to another, traded again and again, but with it moved ideas. How to shape it into blades that glinted like lightning, how to carve copper to catch the sun, how to weave grasses into patterns that told stories of stars and storms. The trade routes were not merely roads, they were the veins through which imagination flowed, and wherever people met they shared, languages intertwined. A word for river in one valley might echo faintly in the speech of another, hundreds of miles away. A song sung by fishermen on the coast might find new life among hunters in the northern forests. A story of a sky serpent seen by one people would appear in another's myth centuries later, transformed but still familiar, proof that the world itself remembered. At night the traders rested beside their fires. The forests whispered around them. Sometimes they spoke softly to the flames, telling stories of the places they had passed, of mountains that smoked, of waters that glowed with fish like scattered stars, of lands where the ground itself was red with clay, and though their voices were small against the vast night, the world seemed to listen. Somewhere downstream another fire flickered in reply. In the great cities like Cahokia these networks converged, not just in trade but in ceremony. When the traders arrived, they brought with them the essence of distant places. One might come bearing obsidian, another with copper, another with shells that glimmered faintly in the firelight. Each item was placed upon the ground with care, as if feeding the earth itself. Elders would touch them gently, eyes closed, sensing not only their beauty but their journey, the countless hands that had carried them, the wind and rain they had known, the rivers that had reflected their shine. To them these were not dead things. They were alive with memory. Then the drums would begin. The rhythm rose slowly, matching the heartbeat of the land. People gathered in circles, their movements fluid, their songs rising and falling like the breath of wind. And in that rhythm something beyond trade occurred, something deeper, invisible. The world became one vast circle, the obsidian, the copper, the shells, the people, all joined by invisible threads of intention and meaning. When the ceremonies ended, the traders departed once more, carrying new stories with them. Some traveled north toward the Great Lakes where the waters shone like mirrors. Others turned south, following the rivers toward the sea, where the horizon shimmered endlessly. And the network grew, a living map that pulsed with motion, always shifting, always returning. Even across thousands of miles they remained connected, through shared myths of the stars, of animals that guided travelers, of spirits who guarded the rivers. Some said the wind itself remembered their footsteps, whispering along the trails even when no one walked them anymore. And as you listen now, that whisper still moves, soft, steady, older than memory. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the movement of those ancient canoes, the cool mist against your skin, the creak of wood, the smell of rain and smoke, the faint rhythm of a paddle dipping into water. You can hear the voices, distant, timeless, speaking in languages you don't know yet somehow understand. Because those voices are still here. They live in the land, in the rivers, in the heartbeat of the soil beneath your feet. There comes a time in every great rhythm when the drum beat slows. The rivers still move. The wind still breathes. But the footsteps that once traced the edges of the land begin to fade. So it was with the trade routes, those living threads that once bound the continent in silent harmony. For centuries they endured, winding through forests, valleys, and plains, connecting people who might never meet but who shared the same stars and stories. But the world, even in its calmest age, is never still. Floods changed the courses of rivers. Forests gave way to open prairie. People moved, searching for new soil, new water, new beginnings. Some paths disappeared under new growth, swallowed by the green hush of time. And yet, even as they vanished, something of them remained. Not in the eyes, but in the bones of the land itself. The old roots became memories embedded in the ground, in the lines where grass grew thicker, where stones seemed too carefully placed to be chance. Animals began to walk the same paths. The rivers still turned where the canoes once glided. The land remembered every journey. Imagine a lone traveler standing at the edge of one of those forgotten trails. The air is heavy with summer heat. Around him the forest hums, cicadas in the branches, the slow heartbeat of the world. He carries with him a copper pendant shaped generations ago, its surface smooth from the hands that passed it down. He doesn't know where it was first made, only that his people say it came from the north, where the lakes shine brighter than the moon. He presses it between his palms and whispers a prayer, not words of asking, but words of thanks. Then he steps forward, following the invisible road that still hums beneath his feet. Somewhere far away, another person walks another piece of the same old path, guided by instinct more than knowledge. They do not know each other, and yet they are connected, and as the old traders were, by motion, by intention, by belonging to a world that breathes as one. When the newcomers came, the ships from across the sea, bringing strange metals and strange tongues, the old networks began to crumble. The delicate web of trust and exchange that had stretched for millennia was torn by conquest and hunger. Rivers that once carried offerings now carried the reflections of fire. The trade routes turned to silence, but silence is not the same as forgetting. Even in stillness, something endures. The obsidian, the copper, the shells, they remain in the earth, buried like the memories of a dream. When unearthed, they gleam faintly under the sun, unchanged by centuries. The archaeologists who find them hold them carefully, wondering how such things traveled so far. But the real answer is not in distance. It is in devotion. The devotion of people who believed that every path, every river, every meeting was part of a larger circle, one that never truly ends. Tonight, as you listen, imagine that circle glowing faintly beneath the land. Picture lines of light connecting mountain to valley, lake to sea, heart to heart. They move slowly, almost imperceptibly, but they are there, pulsing beneath the cities, beneath the forests, beneath even the places where no one walks anymore. You are part of that same network. The air you breathe has passed through ancient leaves, The water you drink once touched shores where traders rested and dreamed. The stars you see are the same that guided their way home. The world you inhabit is their echo, and their gift. The wind shifts, carrying with it the scent of rain and soil. The rivers murmur in the dark. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint sound of paddles against water, the laughter of voices long gone, the rustle of baskets filled with copper and shell. It is not memory. It is presence, quiet, eternal, waiting. The traders are still moving somewhere in time. They walk the old roads, glide along the sleeping rivers, passing through the mist, unseen but not lost. Their fires still glow faintly in the night of the world, each one a heartbeat that has never stopped. And now, as you drift toward sleep, their rhythm becomes your own. You feel the same pulse, steady, ancient, alive. You are the river and the path and the traveler. The world moves through you, and you through it endlessly. The obsidian gleams again in your mind, holding the reflection of stars. The copper warms like captured sunlight. The shell hums faintly with the sound of waves that never ceased. All the fragments of the old world breathe together whole once more. So close your eyes. Let the rhythm of the land carry you. Let the rivers guide you home. The footsteps of the ancients fade softly into the sound of wind and water, and in that silence peace returns. Wide, deep, and endless as the earth itself. Sleep now. The world remembers you as it remembers them, and in the great circle of time, you are already home. The morning light falls softly across the wide river valley, spreading like liquid gold across a landscape that seems almost too vast to belong to memory. The air is still, filled only with the faint hum of insects and the low whisper of wind moving through tall grass. Yet beneath this silence the earth remembers. The shapes of mounds and terraces rise gently from the soil. Not ruins of stone, but forms molded from living ground, breathing quietly through centuries of sleep. If you were to stand there now, you might not see the full pattern at first. It reveals itself slowly, as if the land must decide whether you are ready to understand. From a high vantage, you would notice the lines, broad avenues cut straight as sunbeams, plazas open and circular, mounds placed not at random but in perfect relation to one another, each rising to a measured height, each aligned with the path of the sun. This was not wilderness. This was a world designed, deliberate, intelligent, vast. The people who built it did not use metal or beasts of burden. They worked with their hands, with baskets, with patience and time. Generation after generation they shaped the earth, carrying soil from the lowlands, packing it layer by layer, turning riverside mud into mountains of meaning. Monk's Mound at Cahokia rose higher than the cathedrals that would one day be built across the ocean. A monument not to conquest, but to continuity. Around it stretched a city of tens of thousands. Homes made of wood and thatch stood in clusters, each arranged around courtyards. Broad plazas opened between them, serving as gathering places, marketplaces, and ceremonial grounds. In the distance, wooden towers watched the horizon, while palisades of timber protected the heart of the settlement. Everything flowed together, the living spaces, the sacred sites, the fields beyond the walls. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. This was a civilization built not of stone, but of rhythm. To walk through it would have been to feel order in the air. The alignment of mounds to the solstice sunrise, the measured distance between plazas, the clear design that connected the sacred and the everyday. Even the crops followed the same pattern of precision. Fields of maize, beans, and squash grew in harmony, the three sisters planted together so that each fed the other. The corn reached for the sun, the beans climbed its stalks, and the squash spread its broad leaves to keep the soil cool and damp. It was agriculture as art, a living geometry that sustained cities for centuries. The river nearby carried canoes filled with grain, pottery and trade goods. The city's markets pulsed with movement. Traders from far regions brought copper from the north, shells from the Gulf, and obsidian from the distant south. The air would have been filled with the scent of food cooking, the rhythm of drums, the laughter of children running between the homes, their shadows flickering across the packed earth, and above it all the mounds rose like sacred mountains. Some were flat-topped, holding temples or the dwellings of leaders. Others were conical, dedicated to ancestors or the passage of seasons. At night fires burned atop them, glowing like stars fallen to earth. The smoke rose and mingled with the real stars above, earth and sky speaking the same language. Every structure carried purpose. Every alignment held meaning. They did not build for beauty alone but for balance. The plazas faced the cardinal directions, the mounds marked celestial events, and the very flow of the city mirrored the flow of the heavens. It was a design philosophy that saw no separation between architecture and spirituality, between the physical and the eternal. And yet, for all their order, these cities were alive with sound, the rhythm of tools striking wood, the soft chant of farmers tending the fields, the echo of ceremonies that rose like waves in the air. It was a place of movement and harmony, of labor joined with devotion. From a distance, you might have seen the city glowing at dusk, the mounds golden in the fading light, the river reflecting the sky in streaks of crimson and blue. You would have heard the faint murmur of thousands of lives blending together into something larger than themselves. This was North America before the chronicles of history began. Not empty, not primitive, but intricate, intentional, and wise. The builders of these monumental earthworks were not simply architects of soil. They were architects of meaning. They shaped the world as a mirror of the cosmos, aligning human life with the pulse of the planet. Their cities were calendars. Their temples were observatories. Their fields were sacred geometry written in green. And as centuries passed, each generation added another layer of earth, of faith, of memory, until the land itself became a story, told without words. When the night returned, the fires flickered once more upon the mounds. The stars hung low, their reflections trembling in the river's surface. The city exhaled in sleep. It was a civilization built from silence, sustained by patience, and guided by the rhythm of the universe. When dawn returned to those cities of earth and fire, it rose gently as though careful not to disturb the balance. The mist curled around the mounds like breath, sliding over their slopes before dissolving into the warming air. The people would wake in rhythm with the light. Smoke rose slowly from hearths carrying the scent of maize cakes and dried herbs. In those quiet mornings the city seemed to breathe, a vast organism of clay, wood, and humanity, every heartbeat syncing with the turning sky. These were not scattered tribes wandering the wilderness. They were planners, engineers, astronomers. Their work was deliberate, almost mathematical, yet rooted in reverence. The alignment of a mound was not a mere act of measurement. It was a conversation with the stars. They built not just for the living but for time itself. Imagine the central plaza of one such city. Around its open heart the mounds rise at measured distances. Each one aligns to a moment in the sky. The summer solstice, the winter sunrise, the equinox when day and night share equal power. The people gathered here did not need written calendars. The sky was their manuscript, the horizon their clock. When the first light of the solstice touched the apex of a mound, it marked not only the passage of time, but the renewal of harmony between earth and heaven. The leaders, not kings in the way we might imagine, but stewards of cosmic order, would stand before their people and speak in low, steady voices. Their power came not from conquest but from understanding. They were keepers of rhythm, custodians of time, The people followed them because they maintained the balance between the harvest and the flood, the sun and the soil, the living and the dead. The cities themselves were designed to hold that balance. The dwellings radiated outward in circles or squares, each cluster forming a small community of extended families. Paths connected them like veins, converging at the plazas where markets thrived. Here, artisans shaped copper into ornaments that caught the light like fire. Potters painted spirals that echoed the motion of galaxies. Every act of craft carried a touch of the sacred. Further beyond the walls, the fields stretched like woven cloth, their patterns shifting with the seasons. Maize rustled under the wind. Beans twisted upward in green threads. Squash leaves glimmered with dew. Beyond that, forests, rivers, the wild that sustained everything. The people did not divide themselves from nature. They were inside it as a heartbeat is inside the body. And everywhere there was sound, the steady pounding of pestles grinding corn, the laughter of children chasing dogs between the houses, the soft rhythmic chant of someone shaping clay or weaving fibers into cloth. In the distance a drum began, slow, deliberate, as if measuring the turning of the sun. These were not simple societies. They had hierarchies, laws, spiritual orders. Elders and priests oversaw ceremonies. Farmers measured their planting by the moon. Hunters and traders moved far along the rivers, carrying goods and stories back to the heart of the city. Communication flowed like water, ideas, traditions, songs. The mound builders were bound by geography, but their imagination stretched across the continent. At night, the city transformed again. Fires flickered on the mounds and the sky became an inverted mirror, the constellations above reflected by the glowing lights below. The people would gather for rituals, drumming softly, singing in tones that rose and fell like the wind. The smoke curled upward, carrying prayers for rain, for balance, for the continued turning of the world. And when the moon was high, silence would return, but not an empty silence. It was full, resonant, alive with unseen presence. You could almost hear the hum of the earth beneath your feet, the faint pulse of centuries breathing through the soil. Beneath those mounds rested generations. Each new layer of construction covered the old, merging the living with the remembered. The dead were not gone. They were part of the foundation. Every new addition, a layer of clay, a new terrace, a wall reshaped, was an act of conversation with ancestors. It was architecture as lineage. The builders were patient. They did not rush creation. Time was their material, just as much as earth and wood. To raise a mound might take decades and even centuries, as each generation added their portion. A child might grow old before the final soil was laid. Yet no one saw this as loss. The act itself was sacred. The work was eternal. Even the smallest detail had purpose. The entrances of temples faced directions chosen with care. Water channels ran between plazas to manage floods and nourish the crops. Elevated terraces protected homes from rising rivers. Every design responded to the rhythm of the environment, adapting, blending, listening. It was not a warlike architecture. It was a peaceful one, an art of coexistence. The walls were not meant to divide, but to guide. The open plazas were meant to gather, not to defend. The geometry of their world encouraged meeting, trade, sharing. The earthworks were their cathedrals, but also their classrooms. And then, as all things do, their balance began to shift. Not all at once, not in violence, but slowly, like a change in the tone of the wind. The rivers altered course. The forests thinned. The rains came later each year. Populations moved, seeking new ground. Yet even as cities emptied, the mounds remained, monuments of earth that refused to vanish. The land reclaimed them, yes, but gently. Trees grew over them, roots intertwined with ancient clay. Grass smoothed their shapes, the wind carried their dust. But beneath it all, the order remained. The pattern was never lost. And though centuries would pass, though explorers, settlers, and cities of a different kind would come, the old blueprints of harmony would still lie beneath the soil, waiting to be rediscovered, waiting as the earth always waits, for listening to return. The centuries turned quietly. The mounds endured. The rivers that once carried canoes filled with grain and copper now wound through forests of silence. The plazas that had pulsed with drums and voices fell still beneath the grass. Yet the air still felt heavy with memory, as though every gust of wind, every falling leaf, still carried whispers from the people who had shaped the land before history began to write itself. No single moment marked their ending. There was no final battle, no collapse written in smoke and ruin. Instead, the change came softly, among like fog seeping into valleys, slow and steady. The climate shifted. The soil grew tired. Rivers once faithful began to flood or fade unpredictably. Trade routes that had bound distant lands weakened. Perhaps hunger came first, or loss of faith in the old order. Perhaps, like all great societies, they simply grew beyond what the land could hold. Families drifted away, carrying seeds and stories with them. Villages appeared where cities once stood. Children played in the shadow of mounds that had once hosted ceremonies to the sun. Time folded the world back into quiet, but silence here was not death. It was transformation, for the mounds did not disappear. They sank into the earth's slow rhythm, blending into the living landscape. Animals nested on them. Trees took root in their slopes. Seasons painted them green, then gold, then white. Beneath each layer of soil, beneath each root and stone, the old design slept intact, a language of order written directly into the land itself. Centuries later, when new people arrived on this continent and called it new, they walked unknowingly through cities older than memory. They built roads across ancient plazas, planted farms over ceremonial grounds, erected towns beside forgotten rivers that had once carried entire economies of life and meaning. The mounds watched them come, silent, enduring, patient. Only a few, curious or reverent, stopped to wonder at the shapes beneath their feet. The strange symmetry of the land, the impossible perfection of these raised forms. Some dismissed them as natural hills. Others guessed at fortifications built by vanished tribes. Few understood that these were monuments not to war, but to balance, that they were not ruins of conquest but architectures of peace. In time, archaeologists would cut into the earth and find the layers, one upon another, built by hands that knew the weight of generations. They found shell beads, copper pendants, fragments of pottery painted with spirals and suns. They found burials laid with care, bones turned gently toward the rising dawn. They found, beneath centuries of silence, a world that had never truly vanished. Even in their absence, the mound builders left behind a design philosophy that feels strangely modern. Their cities were sustainable before the word existed. Their agriculture regenerated the land rather than exhausting it. Their architecture worked with the flow of water, the slope of wind, the turning of the stars. They lived within the pattern, not against it. It is easy now to mistake simplicity for lack of sophistication. Yet there is a wisdom in those earthen blueprints that we are only beginning to understand again. A wisdom that speaks softly from beneath the soil. Stand on the edge of one of their ancient sites at dusk, and you will feel it. The air changes. The world grows still, as if the land itself recognizes your presence. The horizon opens wide, and for a moment you see it all. The geometry of mounds glowing under the last light, the slow drift of the river catching fire in the sun's reflection. You can almost imagine the city returning around you. The sound of footsteps in the plaza, the laughter of children, the deep pulse of drums rolling like thunder in the distance. You might look up and see the same constellations that guided their hands, the same moon that marked their planting and their prayers. The stars, too, have not forgotten. They still rise and fall in rhythm with the mounds below, as though the earth and sky are still locked in their ancient dialogue. There is a peace in knowing that nothing truly vanishes, that every civilization, every story, leaves an echo. The mounds do not speak in words, yet they tell us everything we need to remember: patience, cooperation, harmony with the living world. They remind us that greatness does not always rise in stone, and wisdom does not always shout. Sometimes it builds quietly, with soil and time, and perhaps, in this way, they are not gone at all. Their design still lives in the land itself, in the careful rows of crops that follow the shape of the river, in the way our roads unknowingly trace ancient paths, in the quiet reverence we feel when, standing beneath the open sky, their architecture of mystery and silence continues to hold the memory of what humanity can be when it listens to the world instead of conquering it. So now, as night descends once more, imagine the landscape of old America breathing again. The mounds shimmer beneath the moonlight, the grass swaying like waves. The wind hums softly through the trees, and the river murmurs its eternal language. Somewhere, far away, a single drumbeat echoes, slow and steady, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. And in that rhythm, you feel it, the patience of builders who shaped time itself, the silence of the ancestors who still dream beneath the soil, the quiet promise that balance can be found again. Rest now, listener. The land remembers, and through its gentle remembering, so do we. There was a time when the land itself spoke their names. The rivers whispered them in the rush of water. The wind carried them through the tall grass, and the stars spelled them in patterns that only the patient could read. But as centuries passed, the voices grew faint. The stories blurred. The mounds that once pulsed with ceremony were swallowed by trees and moss. Their edges softened until they looked like gentle hills, harmless and forgotten. When time began to bury them, it did not do so cruelly, only inevitably. The great civilizations of the earth often vanish not with fire but with silence. Seasons pass, floods reshape the soil, forests reclaim what was once cleared. The cities fade, their outlines dissolving into the same clay that birthed them. But what time began, colonization finished. When new hands arrived on these shores, they did not see civilization, only wilderness. They saw endless space, rich soil, and rivers wide enough for ships, but they did not recognize the memory of the land beneath their feet. The mounds were dismissed as curiosities, the relics inside them taken as trophies or puzzles. To the settlers and chroniclers, these earthworks were too precise, too vast to have been made by the ancestors of the people still living nearby. And so they created a myth of lost builders, a vanished race erased even as they were imagined. It is one of history's deepest cruelties, to take not only a people's land, but also the story of their hands. The real builders were still there. Their descendants, their songs, their ways of tending the soil and reading the sky. Yet the written histories chose to forget. In old journals and dusty reports you can find the same words repeated: mystery, unknown, extinct. As though entire nations could simply vanish, leaving behind only neat rows of mounds and shards of pottery, as though time itself had swallowed them whole. But time does not destroy. It only hides. Beneath every forgotten field, beneath every modern city built atop the old, their presence endures. The shapes they raised still catch the dawn light. The artifacts found in the soil, a bead, a blade, a carved stone, still hum faintly with memory. You can feel it when you hold them, the weight of centuries, the hum of 1,000 lives compressed into a single fragment. Imagine a quiet morning long before maps, before nations. The air heavy with mist, The forest dripping from last night's rain. Somewhere in the distance, smoke curls upward from a small village. The people there wake slowly, stepping out into the cool light. A mother grinds corn at her hearth. A man sharpens a tool. A child runs through the wet grass laughing. Their language, their rhythm, their world, all of it ordinary, all of it sacred. That morning, like countless others, was real. It was lived. And yet history, the kind written in books and museum, will call it prehistoric, as though it were a shadow before time began. When the colonizers came, they brought with them a new measure of time, one that began with their arrival. Everything before that became before discovery, as if the world had been waiting for them to wake it. The names of rivers, mountains, and peoples were changed to fit a new tongue. The sacred sites were fenced off, excavated, or simply destroyed to make way for farms and towns. The old words faded from memory, carried only in whispers and songs sung low enough to hide. The mounds, those monumental hearts of ancient cities, were leveled for roads or plowed for crops. Some were mined for their soil, others looted for the treasures they held. What remained was turned into legend. Stories of giants, lost races, or even visitors from the stars. Anything but the truth, that these were the works of native peoples whose ancestors had mastered agriculture, astronomy, trade, and city building long before the first sails appeared on the horizon. To erase a people, one need not burn their records. One need only refuse to believe they ever had them. The silence that followed was deep. For generations, the descendants of the mound builders watched as their heritage was dismissed, their history overwritten. Yet the land still remembered. The rivers continued to flow along ancient trade routes. The stars still aligned with the mounds, and every spring the fields blossomed in the same sacred patterns that their ancestors had once tended. If you walk through those landscapes now, through the valleys of the Mississippi, the plains of Ohio, the wooded ridges of Illinois, you can still feel them. Beneath the hum of cars, beneath the buzz of power lines, beneath the layers of asphalt and centuries, their heartbeat continues. At dusk, when the light grows gold and the air turns soft, the outlines of the mounds return for a moment. The hills seem sharper, more deliberate. The trees cast shadows that align with the setting sun. You realize the geometry never disappeared. Only your awareness of it did. Time may have buried their names, but it could not erase their design. The land itself is their language, and if you listen long enough, you might still hear them. In the wind moving across the river, in the cry of a bird circling above a forgotten mound. Not words exactly, but presence. The hum of lives that once shaped this continent and still linger beneath its skin. Centuries after the last smoke had risen from the mounds, after forests had reclaimed the plazas and rivers had shifted their beds, strangers with notebooks and shovels arrived. They came from distant cities, their boots pressing into the same soil that had once been sacred ground. They did not come to pray or to remember. They came to measure, to classify, to name. The wind moved quietly among them as they worked. They dug trenches through the mounds, carefully slicing into the layers of earth. The smell of clay and time rose like incense. Each handful of soil carried centuries of labor, grains carried in baskets tamped by countless feet, shaped by countless hands. Yet in the language of those early explorers, it was described coldly. Earthworks, tumuli, ancient fortifications. To them, these were not memories but mysteries. They wondered who had built them and why. Some speculated about a lost race, perhaps connected to distant civilizations across the ocean. Others spoke of the 10 lost tribes of Israel or Atlantis or even visitors from other worlds. Anything but the truth that the builders' descendants still lived in the very same valleys. People who could have told them stories if they had only asked. In a strange way, rediscovery became another form of burial. The excavation stripped away context, turning sacred sites into curiosities, pieces into data, stories into silence. The past was dissected but not understood, and yet even through misunderstanding, the truth began to shimmer faintly. Artifacts emerged that spoke a universal language. Beads carved from seashells found hundreds of miles from the coast. Copper ornaments shaped in the image of the sun. Pottery patterned with spirals echoing the motion of galaxies. The further they dug, the older the story became, and the more impossible it was to deny that this was civilization. Not coincidence still. The names remained buried. The archaeologists gave them new ones: Hopewell, Adena, Mississippian, words invented by those who could not pronounce the original. Names borrowed from farms, rivers, towns built over ancient cities. Even their rediscovery was renamed. And so the story of the mound builders became a puzzle with missing pieces, half wonder, half loss. The deeper they dug, the more they realized the magnitude of what had been forgotten. Cities older than Rome. Trade networks that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Ceremonial sites aligned with solstices and lunar cycles, mapped with a precision that rivaled any ancient observatory. But without their names, their voices, their languages, how could one truly know them? Imagine for a moment standing on the crest of a mound at twilight. Below you, the river winds through the valley, carrying the reflection of 1,000 stars. You can almost feel the hum of their world beneath your feet. The pulse of drums, the flicker of firelight, the murmur of prayers rising to the constellations. Then you blink and the vision fades. The modern world returns. Highways, streetlights, a faint glow on the horizon. Yet the memory remains, just beneath perception. Even now the mounds hold their secrets. Some have never been excavated. Others have been carefully preserved, allowed to rest. Scientists use new tools, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, to see beneath the surface without disturbing the earth. What they find is astonishing. Geometric complexes spanning miles, connected networks of ceremonial roads, evidence of planned cities that once thrived with tens of thousands of inhabitants. And in each discovery, there is a quiet acknowledgement that the ancestors of today's native peoples were not remnants of something primitive, but inheritors of something profound. The wind carries their truth gently but firmly. You cannot erase a people from the land they shaped. The design remains in the rivers, in the curves of the valleys, in the quiet persistence of their descendants who still live nearby. Those who remember in their own way, through story, ceremony, and survival. For every artifact uncovered, there are 100 memories still buried, not in the ground but in language, in silence, in loss. And yet silence can be powerful. It can hold what cannot be spoken. When you stand at one of these sites today, you might not hear a voice, but you feel something larger. A deep, steady awareness that this place has been loved before. That others once stood here, watching the same sunrise, the same stars turn. The ground beneath your feet feels alive with presence, like an old heartbeat still echoing softly through the soil. History may have buried their names, but the earth has never forgotten them. It carries their fingerprints in its layers, their vision in its contours, their persistence in its stillness. And now slowly, we are learning to listen again. The archaeologists, the historians, the descendants, and all trace the same question. Not just who they were, but how they understood the world. Because in their silence there is a kind of wisdom, a knowledge of impermanence, a faith that what is built in harmony with the earth can never truly vanish, no matter how many centuries pass above it. You can hear it when the rain falls, the sound of drops striking soil layered by human hands, by generations who believed that the earth was alive, that to shape it was an act of prayer. Their cities are gone, but their design remains. Their words are lost, but their meaning endures. Time may have buried their names, but it could not bury their essence. The wind over the valleys feels older than sound. It moves through trees that have grown from the roots of forgotten villages. It circles the quiet ridges where earth once rose by human hands, and if you listen long enough, you begin to hear what remains beneath language. A low rhythmic murmur, something between heartbeat and memory. It is not imagination. The earth remembers. The names are gone, yes, but the meanings linger. Every culture leaves its echo in the shape of the land. In the way rivers bend, in the way fields are divided, in the invisible geometry that still ties one hill to another. The mounds were once landmarks not just of geography but of belonging. And though we may not know the words spoken when they were built, we can still feel the pulse of their intention. Long before the textbooks and maps, before borders and nations, there were places of gathering, circles where trade and ceremony intertwined. People met not as strangers but as participants in the same living pattern. When copper passed from northern forests to southern deltas, when shells from distant shores found their way into the heartlands, they carried not only value but connection. It was a web of exchange, of story, of kinship that stretched across a continent. And then slowly that web was cut apart. Colonization was not just the taking of land, it was the taking of continuity. The stories that tied people to their ancestors were severed, replaced with maps that began at the point of conquest. Where once there had been living names, names born from rivers and winds and stars, there were now lines on parchment, and words from another tongue. For a long time, the world forgot what it had lost. But time, patient as it is, never forgets. It buries, but it does not erase. Beneath every road and every city, beneath the fields of corn and the forests of oak, lie the traces of those who came before. A shard of pottery, a line of post holes forming a circle, a mound still breathing beneath the roots of trees. Each discovery feels like a small awakening, not of the past, but of awareness. Archaeologists today do not dig only for artifacts. They listen for stories. They read the soil like scripture. They trace the layers of ash, pollen, and bone to reconstruct the lives that time concealed. And when they share what they find, a new understanding unfolds. That North America was never an empty canvas awaiting discovery. It was already an intricate tapestry, woven with genius and intention, long before any ship touched its shores. The people whose names were buried are no longer faceless. They are being remembered not as myths but as ancestors. Their descendants, the indigenous nations of today, continue to carry fragments of their spirit, their resilience, their songs. The thread of survival never broke. It only went underground, like a river flowing silently beneath the earth, waiting to rise again. If you visit the great mounds now at Cahokia, at Serpent Mound, at Poverty Point, you might see visitors walking quietly, their voices hushed. You might see offerings left discreetly at the base, cornmeal, tobacco, a feather. These are not acts of worship but of recognition. The modern world is beginning to remember that history does not begin with writing, and civilization is not measured by stone alone. The mounds rise still, steady, enduring, weathered, but whole. They hold the stories we forgot to tell, the names we forgot to speak, and when the light of evening falls across their slopes, the land seems to breathe again, its silence deep and kind. Perhaps that is the final gift of those who built with earth instead of empire. They knew that nothing human is permanent, but everything sacred leaves a trace. The soil remembers the warmth of their hands, the rhythm of their labor, the peace they sought in symmetry. Even their disappearance became part of the cycle. Decay, renewal, return. And so the question becomes not what happened to them, but what remains of them within us. The need to build in harmony, The sense that the world is alive and aware. The intuition that every shape and every circle, every line, every mound mirrors something vast above. These are not lost ideas. They sleep within us, waiting to be recognized again. When you stand on a quiet hill at dusk and watch the last light fade across the horizon, when you feel the hush of the world growing still, you are close to their silence, the same silence they once shaped with devotion. If you let your thoughts soften, if you let the noise of modern life fade for a while, you might hear them too. Not as ghosts, but as presence. You might hear the steady rhythm of their drums blending with your heartbeat. You might see the stars above aligning with the earth below. You might feel the ancient truth they once lived by, that to be alive is to belong to the turning of the world. Their names were buried by time, but their essence was not. It rises again in the wind over the plains, in the slow breathing of the forests, in the voices of those who still remember. And as you drift into rest, imagine the land as it once was, open and endless, glowing softly beneath a sky of 1,000 stars. Imagine the people who walked it, who sang to the rivers and shaped the earth into living monuments. They are still here in every quiet space between heartbeats. Their story never ended. It only became silence. The kind of silence that holds the whole world inside it. Sleep now. The past is breathing beneath you, and in that breath their buried names are whispering back into being. The wind carries the faintest trace of what was lost, not in words, but in feeling. A quiet familiarity, as if the land itself remembers what we have forgotten. Across the valleys and plateaus of North America, pieces of an immense puzzle are being lifted from the soil, fragments of pottery, shards of tools, seeds preserved in ancient hearths. They are small things, humble things, but together they speak with the weight of centuries. Modern science bends close to listen. DNA studies reveal genetic ties stretching across vast distances, linking tribes and regions long thought separate. The soil yields new stories through carbon dating, through pollen analysis, through the whispers of isotopes and sediments. Archaeologists move with reverence, brushing the earth not as conquerors of knowledge but as translators of memory. Every discovery reshapes the narrative we once believed was complete. The myth of an empty land, of isolated peoples, fades beneath the evidence of networks as intricate as any in the ancient world. Trade routes stretched thousands of miles, weaving the copper of the north with the shells of the south, the obsidian of Mexico with the plains of the Midwest. Ceremonial mounds aligned with celestial bodies speak of mathematicians and astronomers who read the sky as scripture.
Fields of ancient corn and beans, terraces shaped to the rhythm of rainfall, all hint at agricultural minds that understood the breath of the earth long before written record. And through it all,
something deeper begins to emerge, a shift not only in understanding, but in humility. Because the past, as we once imagined it, was never silent. It was only unheard. For centuries, indigenous oral histories have told stories of migrations, of floods, of alliances and journeys older than any colonial record. These stories, once dismissed as myth, now find echoes in the soil. The timelines of science and the timelines of memory begin to intertwine, revealing that both have always been part of the same song, different instruments, one melody. A legend from the Great Lakes speaks of ancestors who traveled by following the stars reflected in the water. Archaeological evidence now shows trade connections reaching from those same lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Another tale from the Mississippi Valley recalls a great city of earthen temples, where people gathered to celebrate the sun. Cahokia rises from the archaeological record to match that description. A metropolis of tens of thousands, filled with ceremony and structure, thriving centuries before Columbus ever sailed. What was once called myth begins to look like memory. Part 2. The rediscovery of ancient America is not a single revelation, but a slow awakening. It unfolds softly, like dawn light over an old landscape. For generations, the history of this continent was told from the outside, framed through the eyes of explorers and settlers who believed they were stepping into a wilderness. But now science, storytelling, and indigenous knowledge are converging to reveal what the land already knew. It was never wilderness. It was home. DNA sequencing from ancient remains shows continuity across thousands of years, proof that many indigenous nations today descend directly from those first architects of the land. Languages, too, carry memory, their rhythms tracing patterns of migration and exchange. In words still spoken by elders, you can hear echoes of ancient kinship, of stories that walked across mountains and rivers, carried in the breath of generations. Modern archaeology has begun to listen differently. Excavations are now often guided by tribal historians and elders who understand where and how to look, not as a search for treasure, but as a reconnection of roots. When they visit a site, they do not see ruins. They see presence. A hearth is not an artifact. It is the remains of warmth. A burial mound is not a monument. It is a conversation with ancestors still ongoing. Each find becomes not only an answer but an invitation. To see time not as a straight line but as a circle, a living cycle where past and present breathe together. And so, as satellites map ancient riverbeds and LiDAR scans reveal hidden cities beneath forests, another form of revelation takes shape, not in the machines or the data, but in the realization that the old stories were true all along. The land itself was the library. We simply hadn't learned how to read it. Some of the most profound rediscoveries are quiet ones, a footprint pressed into dried mud, a flake of obsidian carried thousands of miles from its volcanic source, the faint outline of a field system visible only at sunrise. These details whisper of movement and intention, of communities who built, traded, celebrated, dreamed. In the deserts of the Southwest, new excavations show ancient canal networks rivaling those of Mesopotamia. In the north, traces of copper mining reveal industry and skill that stretched back millennia. The Great Plains, once thought transient, reveal settlement layers built upon older ones, evidence of stability and culture. It is humbling to realize how deeply this land was shaped by human care. It was not an untouched world, but a tended one. Forests were burned in cycles to renew growth. Rivers were guided by stone and clay. Agriculture was symbiotic, woven into the natural pulse. Every element of life, dear, from planting to ceremony, was a dialogue with the environment, not an attempt to dominate it. To rediscover ancient America is to rediscover this harmony, and perhaps that is what the earth has been waiting for. Not to be excavated, but to be understood again. The deeper the soil is read, the more it reveals not separation but connection. Peoples once thought distant now appear linked through art, trade, and cosmology. Patterns of design repeat across the continent, spirals, circles, stars, as if every culture was looking upward, following the same celestial rhythm. It is a quiet reminder that the ancients saw themselves as part of something vast, the sky, the seasons, the spirit that moves between them. Science confirms what spirituality has long known. Memory is not confined to human minds. It lives in the stones, the water, the wind. The past never leaves. It transforms, it waits, it speaks in the language of the patient earth. And now, as we listen again, something miraculous happens. History begins to heal. The broken threads between people and land, between science and story, between past and present, are slowly being rewoven. Indigenous voices are leading the retelling, guiding researchers to approach the ancient world with respect instead of ownership. What was once studied as artifact is now honored as heritage. What was once labeled myth is now recognized as truth wrapped in poetry. In museums, sacred items are being returned. In classrooms, forgotten civilizations are being taught anew. In hearts, a quiet reverence grows. The understanding that the story of America does not begin with discovery, but with continuity. The mounds, the trade routes, the starlit ceremonies, they are not fragments of a lost world. They are threads of one that endures. So when we speak of rediscovering ancient America, we are not uncovering the past. We are uncovering ourselves, our capacity to remember, to listen, to belong. The land was never silent. It was we who had forgotten how to hear. Now the wind over the plains carries familiar music again. The rivers run with echoes of laughter. The soil breathes with stories waiting to bloom. And in the quiet of night, when stars rise over the horizon, the same stars the mound builders once aligned their temples to, you can almost feel their eyes upon you, calm and knowing. The past was never gone. It was only waiting to be heard again.